Hi, I'm John Horden, and this will be a presentation of a paper I co-authored with Dan Lopez de Sa on the metaphysics of social groups, with the title Groups as Pluralities. So in the recent debate on the metaphysics of social groups, there seems to be a fairly broad consensus that each social group is a single thing of one sort or another. We can call this general assumption about social groups singularism about social groups. In opposition to singularism, here we wish to defend the plural view of groups, according to which each social group is just identical to its members. In other words, each social group is identical to the plurality of its members, where a plurality of things is just some things, and to be a member of that plurality is just to be one of those things. This view is not entirely new, having been defended by Max Black back in the 70s, and more recently defended by my co-author Dan Lopez de Sa, and also by Daniel Corman. Nonetheless, here we aim to give the plural view a more thorough defense. So according to the plural view of groups, it's not that there's one thing, the US Supreme Court, that the 9 justices are identical to. Rather, the Supreme Court isn't a thing at all, it's some things. More specifically, it's those 9 people. Accordingly, the expression, the US Supreme Court, is a disguised plural, syntactically singular, but semantically plural. Here we have the converse of so-called paralia tantum like trousers, sunglasses and scissors, which are syntactically plural but semantically singular. Meanwhile, syntactically plural terms, like the supremes, are undisguised plurals. Now, one of the main objections which has been raised against the plural view of groups is what we call the objection from changes in membership. The objection is that unlike pluralities, social groups vary in membership over time and between possible worlds. For instance, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is currently a member of the US Supreme Court, but she wasn't always a member of it, and she might never have been a member of it. In contrast, the corresponding plurality has never failed to include Ginsburg, and couldn't have failed to include her. Here we reply that the expression, the US Supreme Court, is non-rigid or flexible. That is to say, it denotes different pluralities of people at different times and worlds. Much as a singular social role term, like the US Chief Justice, denotes different individuals at different times and worlds. So it's true to say the US Chief Justice used to be someone else, while it's false to say John Roberts used to be someone else. Similarly, it's true to say the US Chief Justice could have been someone else, while it's false to say John Roberts could have been someone else. Still, John Roberts is identical to the US Chief Justice, and the shifts in truth value we see here are just a result of replacing a flexible role term with a rigid personal name, where the flexible term and the rigid term have the same actual current denotation. Analogously, it's true to say the US Supreme Court used to include different people, while it's false to say John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Eleanor Kagan, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh used to include different people. And it's true to say the US Supreme Court could have included different people, while it's false to say John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Eleanor Kagan, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh could have included different people. Still, John Roberts and colleagues are identical to the US Supreme Court. And the shifts in truth value we see here are just a result of replacing a flexible role term with a rigid list of personal names, where the flexible term and the rigid term have the same actual current denotation. A residual problem comes from the idea that the same group can have different members at different times and worlds. For example, it sounds true to say the same group ruled on Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1857 and on Roe versus Wade in 1973, that group being the US Supreme Court. Our solution to this problem is to point out that expressions of the form the same F are generally ambiguous between numerical identity and type identity readings. In this case, we would say that the group that ruled on the first case in 1857 was numerically distinct from the group that ruled on the second case in 1973. Nonetheless, these two groups were the same group insofar as they were both instances of the same type of group relative to the years in question, where the relevant type of group corresponds to the specific social role of the US Supreme Court. Similarly, one can truly say, this is the same fruit as that, while successively demonstrating two numerically distinct apples. Or to give an analogy of individual social roles, one can truly say the same elected official was impeached by the US House of Representatives in 1998 and 2019, that elected official being the US President. In this case, it might seem a bit of a stretch to hear a true type identity reading, as opposed to a false numerical identity reading, but compare the following sentence. The same group of people ruled on Dred Scott versus Sandford in 1857 and on Roe versus Wade in 1973, that group of people being the US Supreme Court. Here it's also a bit of a stretch to hear a true type identity reading, as opposed to a false numerical identity reading. However, given that the US Supreme Court has always been a group of people, if this last sentence is false when understood as a statement of numerical identity, then so is the first sentence. And that, of course, is just what is predicted by the plural view of groups. Another objection that is often raised against the plural view of groups is what we call the objection from coextensive groups. The objection is that unlike pluralities, two or more different social groups can have exactly the same members. To give an example from Gabriel Lusquiano, the Supreme Court could have exactly the same members as a special committee on judicial ethics. Yet these groups may appear to be distinct, having different powers and duties, performing different actions, and being in session at different times. Here we reply that such reasoning clearly overgeneralizes to individual cases. To repeat Lopez de Sa's earlier reply to Lusquiano, the Chief Justice could be exactly the same person as the head of the Special Committee on Judicial Ethics. Yet these officials may appear to be distinct, having different powers and duties, performing different actions, and chairing sessions at different times. So as it turns out, we have no more reason to distinguish the Supreme Court from the Special Committee than we do to distinguish the Chief Justice from the head of the Special Committee. So what explains the appearance of distinct but coextensive groups? Here our diagnosis will be twofold. To start, there is a tendency here to mistake pragmatic inappropriateness for falsehood, and conversely, to mistake pragmatic appropriateness for truth. And there is also a risk of confusing what we call particular and abstract uses of group terms. So imagine that John Roberts is currently chairing a session because he's the Chief Justice, and not because he's the head of the Special Committee. Then an utterance of the head of the Special Committee is chairing the session is true but inappropriate, for it might suggest that he's chairing the session because he's the head of the Special Committee. And this inappropriateness could be expressed by means of metalinguistic negation, as in, the head of the Special Committee isn't chairing the session, which is false when understood as a simple statement, but could be understood as appropriately conveying something along the lines of, don't say the head of the Special Committee is chairing the session. Even if true, this could easily mislead the audience into thinking that the denoted person is chairing the session because he's the head of the Special Committee. Analogously, suppose that some people are both the Supreme Court and the Special Committee, but they're currently in session because they're the Supreme Court, and not because they're the Special Committee. Then an utterance of the Special Committee is in session is true, but inappropriate, for it might suggest that they're in session because they're the Special Committee. And this inappropriateness could be expressed by means of metalinguistic negation, as in, the Special Committee isn't in session, which is false when understood as a simple statement, but which could be understood as appropriately conveying something along the lines of, don't say, the Special Committee is in session. Even if true, this could easily mislead the audience into thinking that the denoted people are in session because of the Special Committee. So if inappropriateness is mistaken for falsity, and appropriateness is mistaken for truth, then the Special Committee is in session would appear to be false, and the Special Committee isn't in session would appear to be true, thus creating the deceptive impression that the Supreme Court is not identical to the Special Committee. Also, we should be careful to distinguish particular and abstract uses of group terms. For example, the following argument, suitably understood, may be sound. The Chief Justice is appointed by the President, but the head of the Special Committee isn't appointed by the President, so the Chief Justice is not identical to the head of the Special Committee. But given our assumption that John Roberts is both the Chief Justice and the head of the Special Committee, if this argument is sound, then here the expression "the Chief Justice" denotes a social role, if anything, as does the expression "the head of the special committee." And this can be seen more clearly by restating the argument as follows. Being the Chief Justice involves having been appointed to that role by whoever was then the President, but being the head of the special committee doesn't involve having been appointed to that role by whoever was then the President, so being the Chief Justice is not identical to being the head of the special committee. Analogously, the following argument, suitably understood, may be sound. The Supreme Court has the power to interpret the Constitution, but the Special Committee doesn't have the power to interpret the Constitution, so the Supreme Court is not identical to the Special Committee. But here we say that, as before, the expression "the Supreme Court" denotes a social role, if anything, as does the expression "the Special Committee." And much as before, this can be seen more clearly by rephrasing the argument as follows. Being the Supreme Court involves having the power to interpret the Constitution, but being the Special Committee doesn't involve having the power to interpret the Constitution, so being the Supreme Court is not identical to being the Special Committee. Still, despite the observed ambiguity or polysemy of group terms, we take the recent debate on the metaphysics of social groups to be mainly concerned with particular groups rather than abstract social roles. For social roles don't perform the actions that we commonly attribute to social groups. They don't walk, talk, sing, dance, gather, fight, vote, celebrate, or rule on legal cases. Now, it can be observed that the arguments we've given here in defence of the plural view of groups can be generalised in defence of other reductionist views of groups, which tend to be confronted with the same two main objections: the objection from changes in membership and the objection from coextensive groups. So, in particular, why not identify social groups with the sets or fusions of their members? Here, a set of people is to be understood in the mathematical sense as something which has those people as members, but which is nonetheless an object in its own right, distinct from those people. And a fusion of people is to be understood as a material object, composed of those people. In short, the set view offers a straightforward account of group membership, but has trouble accounting for how groups are located and have causal powers, given that mathematical sets are traditionally conceived as being unlocated and lacking causal powers. On the other hand, the fusion view has no trouble accounting for how groups are located and have causal powers, but cannot offer a straightforward account of group membership, given that there seem to be many equally good ways of carving up a material fusion of people. Now, perhaps these problems can be dealt with somehow. A defender of the set view might implausibly claim that mathematical sets are located and have causal powers, or she might implausibly deny that social groups are located and have causal powers. On the other hand, a defender of the fusion view might give some complicated semantics for group membership claims, such that the truth of those claims depends on how the group in question is labelled. But we doubt that it's worth trying to rescue these singularist accounts of social groups, given the availability and plausibility of the plural view, which doesn't face these problems. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening.